Jeff Booth, thanks so much for taking your time. How are you doing, man? Great pleasure
Great.
to see you again.
You too, Kevin. Nice to see you.
Okay, Jeff, it's been a while. I want to sort of do a reality check with you first. Yeah, as you know, I'm in Austria with my girlfriend, and our 11-month daughter is gonna turn 1 year next year. So everything is great. And the thing is that I want to talk to you about, what's going on, around us, and how, the speed at which concerns me, the whole development, because there's a law which is going to which is going into effect starting February, regarding mandatory vaccination. And not that I want to, like focus on this topic right today, but I want to like, have your thoughts, how you analyze this whole thing in the context of the Great Reset or monetary inflation and what have you. So they're going to penalize. I mean, they took out the part where it would be sort of imprisonment if you don't pay the penalty. It starts at, I think, 600 euros, and it goes up to thousands of euros. So we're going to, of course, take legal action, legal complaints. There's more and more lawyers and people, waking up, going to the streets, and there's even a sort of a political party forming for, human rights, like principle things. Um, you're in Canada, I guess.
Yeah, I am. I'm in
Yeah,
Vancouver. Yeah, I was in Austria about 4 weeks ago.
I know, and I wanted to come there because I'm in a different state of Austria. So with the baby and everything else, it was difficult. But I watched it afterwards. It was really a very very interesting talk you gave, and I think the people loved it. What was the reaction, by the way?
It was incredible. I think in four different countries, politicians in four different countries asked me to essentially repeat that speech to their constituents. So I think it turned a lot of heads.
I think was there someone from the Austrian National Bank or the sort of central bank of Austria?
Yeah,
Was
they were. It was held at the central bank, and there were a bunch of central bankers, not just Austrian central bank, but a bunch of central bankers in the room. So it was the right audience to talk about the macro problem that's happening. I'll tell you, Kevin, um, many of them are completely unaware. They don't see it at all. They think productivity is low in the world, and they need to get up productivity by printing money. And so unfortunately, you have a whole. And it's easy to say that the whole system is manipulated, and there's a whole bunch of people at the top that are manipulating it. Well, that is true for some people. Largely, what I've learned, it's ignorance.
why is that? I mean, why is there not a sort of an awareness of what's going on? Where does this come from? I mean,
Okay, so why did Sears, which was one time the biggest retailer in the world, that became the biggest retailer in the world from a catalog business, miss Amazon?
yeah.
And again, when your business is constructed in a way to be able to gain value a different way, it's hard to see how fast technology is changing the rules. And that's all that's happened here. You've had technology changing the rules and a whole bunch of people within the system unable to see it. Now, on top of that system, there some bad actors in here that do see it, of course. But I would say predominantly the course is what I just talked about. You have two systems crashing into each other, one driven by technology, one driven by monetary easing, inflation, and they cannot coexist without concentrating all power into the hands of few or the state. And so your talk about what will happen with COVID, or what will happen with global warming, or what will happen with any other symptom of this issue is is the state will consolidate power and remove individual rights and freedoms. I wish that wasn't true, but it is. That is the path that this system takes us on, because while most people don't realize that they're actually making it happen faster by marching on the streets. And so what would a government do? They'll hire more police officers. Right? They'll hire more military to be able to enforce that. When people break windows or steal, what happens is other people vote to remove their own individual rights and freedoms and empower the state more. And this is really important, really, really important, more important than just about anything else people talk about, because when you live in a system with incompatible kind of, if you just said physics, incompatibility of two systems colliding with each other, then that system can't change itself. And imagine what would happen if the entire globe today, we'll look at the stock market sell-off right now, just because Powell said he's going to tighten. He's not going to tighten. He might tighten for a while, but the entire system we live in, all wealth, all functioning economy, everything is sitting on top of that credit-based system. And if you allow it to unwind, you unwind all wealth at the same time, and everything fails. So unfortunately, policymakers are stuck. They're pushing harder and harder. They don't know what we're talking about, but many don't know that they're making the whole system worse and more fragile as we do it. But the output of that is a concentration of power in the hands of a few in government.
I don't want to go into theories or conspiracy theories, but do you think it's very convenient to push for these tyrannical measures now, especially considering what's going on? You just mentioned the whole unwinding thing and inflation and hyperinflation. I mean, we already have to a certain degree hyperinflation, don't we, in some essential products or
So absolutely. And to see this truth now, obviously we're not going down deep, because I'm assuming your audience knows a lot of my work and has listened to stuff that we can start in a spot that we left off on. But if you just imagine, that system cannot stop without collapsing the entire system. So it has to keep printing. And when you have corruption in money, when you have theft in money, which is just a transfer from some people to other people, and that transfer needs to get more and more and more because of technology moving the other way. So that theft has to be greater and greater and greater, what you call hyperinflation, or is that theft, right? Or that, and the rate has to increase. Then when you have corruption in money, and money is just an abstract concept for our time, you must have corruption everywhere in society. And so if you look through that lens and you look through that out at society, and then and then some people realize that what I just said is true, 100% true, then it's easy to understand through that lens. If I can't trust money, and money is the most important thing, it drives all other human action from productivity to the works. If I can't trust money, if somebody's lying to me about money, what else are they lying to me about? But, and here's the but, when conspiracy theorists come up with all of these things, some of which also might be true, they actually empower the state more, because they're marginalized. By and I'll use global warming as an example. Global warming, if you believe in global warming or climate change, and it doesn't much matter, but you have to ask yourself this question. How many people believe in it versus not believe in it? So if you're out there saying global warming doesn't exist, is that a fast way to get marginalized by the state? probably. And a small group of people just get overwhelmed. If you tie the picture that if you believe in global warming, can global warming be solved through an inflationary monetary system that must grow forever on a finite planet? Then you force the people who believe in global warming to see it can't be solved in the way they think it can be solved. And so it's just two different ways. And so in one way, marginalizes people and gives more power to the state. One way brings more people to your side.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah. So, global warming, climate crisis, all this, it's based sort of on a fundamental premise that it's man-made, right? That's, the root, that's the sort of the theory or the alleged science behind it, that it's man-made. Is that?
Well, and again, we're jumping all over the place here,
Yeah.
but you need a narrative for people to believe
Mm-hmm.
that you can print money forever. You need a narrative, because otherwise people are going to ask, what is the basis of our time if you print money forever? And global warming is a really good narrative, right? Because a lot of people believe in global warming, but you could just say really simply, inflation equals climate change. And I'll give you a very real example, and one that will accelerate wealth. And I'm part of that wealth, but I'm a chairman of a board called Cubic Farms. That company has created automated grow systems, vertical farming, that are containerized, and already today, 2021, are lower cost, quite a bit lower cost, and higher nutrient value and everything else, and by localizing lettuce in a container. Why? Because of the automation and the light density over the lettuce, some patents that they hold on how to do this, but it's already lower cost. So that lower cost and higher abundance, you should see what's coming out of these containers. You should see what's the automation here and what happens. So that has now created a break in the market. And the market structure of that, because people want lower price, higher quality, everybody starts using it. And so that is deflation, because it gives us abundance, and we choose it because it gives us more value. And so that's what's happening in the company. Really exciting company. So and that's one tiny little part of this whole picture that I'm talking about. So as that's getting more and more efficient, and what artificial intelligence and what we can do in that company to make it more and more efficient, it's already created a structural break from track farming. And track farming, pesticides, massive machines, lots of labor and everything else for track farming, and then the distribution to get that lettuce across the world. So high labor costs, higher and higher labor costs, higher transportation costs. And now you have something that's more efficient and arguably better for the planet, because it doesn't require transportation, doesn't require anything else. It can be localized at a commercial scale. So it gives more. So what is the offset as that starts to reach the market and scale and give more value? The only way to hold the entire system together, because that deflationary effect will collapse our system if prices don't rise. So the only way to offset that effect is to print more money to make prices rise. What will happen with that? Transportation prices rise, labor costs rise, all of these prices rise. What happens to Cubic Farms? It gets better as a result. It magnifies the gain. So more and more labor comes out because this company is growing so fast and giving more value as the other system is getting more expensive. So what happens to that? Governments need to print more money. You can print more money. It's an isolated example of what's happening overall And you can see it everywhere. That's what's happening on your phone. That's what's happening everywhere. That automation or that technology is driving into a base layer of everything we do. And it's taking away more and more industries. And as government prints, they consolidate power into very few hands as a result of that printing, and society is left out. As they do that, the very thing they're saying they're printing for, climate change, they're making it happen. They're making it happen because you need more labor, higher prices, 2 cars, more things forever at an escalating scale to be able to pay for those higher prices.
And with that, the environmental pollution, as I would call it, I mean, right? The
Exactly.
environmental damages. Right.
Yeah, whether it's climate change or environmental pollution,
right,
or the damage, you can't grow forever on a finite planet. And specifically, way more important than that is you can grow, but growth turns into negative. Is the productivity gain from that growth is negative GDP. How much GDP today is from your calculator app? Right, or your photos or things on your phones. It reduces the GDP because it becomes free. That's the point.
Okay, so let me tie this in. So we are living, in more or less like privileged, like Western countries, as I am, in Austria. But it's really mind-boggling that this is like the first country. I want to go back to my first question, like how do we? I want to talk to you about Bitcoin, of course, but how can Bitcoin, in the midterm or long term, help us free us from defund the state? And because this is what it's, the separation of money and state, but also the defunding of these monopolies on, aggression, violence, coercion, and tyranny.
So if every single person standing up to for their individual rights and freedoms just bought Bitcoin instead and held Bitcoin, you would transfer that power to the individual from the state. That's all it would take. So instead of holding up signs marching on buy Bitcoin, that's literally it. Every single person you see wanting their freedoms back, remembering buy and hold Bitcoin, and is way more important than the wealth it might gain for you. It's a transition from one system that cannot fix itself. It's impossible, to another system that can. On the other side of the system, that literally bridge you're building to another system, is a really hopeful world, because it's congruent. It's congruent with the best in us. And humans, we have kind of this angel and devil, and if our system is built on theft and fraud, and people know that, they will lean in and they'll get closer to that system. They'll get closer to that system, which has a negative externality somewhere else. And because there's way more people than in the system, those people who rise up will overturn that system and give some dictator power, give them unequivocal power to fix it. And then you put power into somebody else who does this exact same thing. Unfortunately, I wish this wasn't true, but if you look through history, these debt resets happen and they change currencies, and then you elect governments that say, we promise we won't do it again, and then they do it again. And so it's a function of essentially inflation in money, which you could argue was a requirement for money. Not a requirement, it was never a requirement, but what ended up happening is on gold, you had to better build a credit-based system on top of gold to get velocity of money. And then that credit-based system had to grow over time. It had to keep growing. And then you'd get to a point where it couldn't be paid back, and everybody knew it couldn't be paid back. So you changed the rules of capitalism to essentially pick the pocket of one part of the population to give to another part of the population to save the system. And then when you did that, and this throughout history, it's not, it also in 2008. And when you did that, you essentially codified the rules that it's okay to cheat into capitalism. And so what would you do if you're a hedge fund and you absolutely know that the government has to blink, and they will print, even so you make a bet, you know you're going to get bailed out. What would you do? You'd make more of those bets. And each time you got bailed out, you would essentially rob society, because inflation is wage deflation and savings deflation. So a whole bunch of people's the income didn't go up to match that. They had their pocket picked as a result. And they start to rise up blaming people when it's really a system.
I mean, it is mind-boggling, Jeff, because I recently talked to Greg Foss. You know, I also we mentioned you, of course, and he said that, I mean, he agrees with me. You know, that I told him, you know, in the European Union, pretty much everything is broke, is bankrupt, insolvent, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, mature for crashing. So, you know, the pension fund, I mean, it's everywhere like that. It's just mind-boggling, because when you look at the numbers, you know, or how many, whatever dollars have been printed in the last 2 years, I think it's 40% or something. And you look at the pension funds, they're broke. You look at the banks, you look, are we at the peak, or where are we? I mean, why is this still able to procrastinate itself or delay itself? Is it like without going into speculation, but is it something that somehow occupies your mind sometimes? Like how long can this go on?
It can go on a long time. It can go on long. It can come down, and it can go on a long time. People will vote for that system, if you want to know that. So, and this is super important that many Bitcoiners miss. Human nature is a hard. If you believe something, and somebody pushes against you, and then you'll lock in your beliefs typically. And if you believe that your pain is caused by somebody else, put a picture on it. Those rich people, that we need to tax them more. You won't even question Bitcoin. You'll think it's solvable by taxes. You'll create an enemy. And then what happens if governments say, okay, we're going to stop printing, and you have a credit collapse, and that credit collapse, people forget that credit collapse is the system. It's everything. It's your supermarkets, it's your banks, it's your everything else. So the credit collapse starts happening. And the first stages of the credit collapse are stock markets fall by 2%, then 5%, then 10%, then 20%. And then the next stage is the bank closes down and you can't get your money. And the next stage is riots on the street. What happens to people in that system? Do you think they say, oh, I know it's Bitcoin, I'm calm and everything else, and I'll just go buy my Bitcoin, I'm good? No, they rise up and they vote for somebody else to say, take back that power. And it's those people's fault. And they're led to revolution and war through the exact same thing. Unfortunately, I wish I didn't have to say this, but unfortunately, we are easily manipulated. If we believe something, we won't question that very often. Few people think in first principles and can check their ego and look at something deeper than their beliefs to be able to question that. It's actually what's so cool about the Bitcoin community. Many of those people had to go through that path to be able to understand Bitcoin, and so they're giant advocates because they understand this at a level that most people don't. But if you look at the general population, you think most people understand this. They don't. And so as a consequence, in that general population, what you'll see is people will make they give the state more power as a result of these these structural problems.
Jeff, yeah, you said something really important. You said that people are so easily manipulated, and it's not only that. I mean, the whole system, and especially now, with this whole, I don't know, brainwashing going on. There's a mass formation, mass psychosis going on. And I talked to Greg Foss also about this, and there's experts who have analyzed this how this whole thing evolves, this mass psychosis. So this obsession with fear that you can see in the people is really staggering. It's when people are so fearful. It's like, I mean, we're talking about like a so-called virus, a pandemic, which is not a pandemic, and people are so fearful. Not only people like friends and families coming with masks and we're like, where's our child going to grow up with? I mean, the damages and the collateral damages and the psychological, emotional, economical damages that have been incurred, it's so crazy to think about this. And and then we don't have the luxury right now to philosophize about all kinds of things around Bitcoin. But we are asking ourselves, and many others whom I've talked to, I mean, people from Austria or German-speaking countries, they're in the same position. They're Bitcoiners, or and they don't know what to do. Where should they emigrate to if things get really bad? I mean, El Salvador, Mexico, Paraguay, and we're talking about like average plebs, who are not lucky, to have like a financial pillow or cushion, to say, okay, I'm just going to pack my stuff and leave, and fly somewhere and establish myself somewhere, especially when you have children, when you have family. Do you know where I'm going with this? It's like,
let me jump. So I want to start with something first before we go to, and here's what I want to start with. Just about the entire world says, I'm not impacted by it, but those other people are. And if you look out at the world, just if you're not impacted by this, then what your life looks like, measure your mirror about how you feel every day, and the abundance in your life, and how many open doors there are, because there's infinite possibilities. If that's true, then you're not influenced by it. So because you can control the fear, you can understand this is a game. It has to play out. I hate the game, but it has to play out, and there's infinite opportunities, and you'll spend more time in hope than in fear. That can, and in me, and by the way, when I look at my life and I look at that, that's where I live. It's just like, and I don't mean to say that as gloating or ego or anything else. It's how I choose to live life. It doesn't stop me from also saying, how do other people look at the world, and how do they choose life, right? And what does their world look like? And so I can understand, I can live in two different thoughts at the same time. If I have all that, it can look like this, could it look like this for other people who could think this? But I guess I would just caution, it's so easy. How many people, I'll use a simple example. You ask people if they're a better than average driver. How many people would say, no, I'm worse than average, right? Everybody thinks it's everybody else, but not them. Everybody thinks that. And it's just simply not true. If these things impact other people, they impact you too. And how, and stepping out of that, meditating if you need to, stepping out of that to say, how do I allow this to not impact me? Is part of the reason that that my family traveled for 3 months this year and just checked out and traveled, because I could work from anywhere, and I wanted to, and it was really good for my wife, because you're out of the news cycle. You're meeting people all over the world, and it didn't, and it was a total change. So that's probably the biggest part. It's everybody else. Now, from a position of hope, because people don't move from fear to fear. And there's a lot of people that would look at Bitcoin through fear. They're being paralyzed by a system that's getting worse and worse. and they don't know, and so what they're thinking is, I need to kick over the monopoly board, right? I'm going to break it down, and that will likely accelerate, and then there will be people protecting the monopoly board from those people, saying it's those people's fault. And that's why we just have to keep going. A system problem to this magnitude cannot fix itself, no matter who you elect, no matter, paint a picture of anybody. There is no person that could fix the system from the system. And it's too far gone. So a new system has to emerge. And that's why and you've probably heard me say this, what's happening with Bitcoin in that emergent system is every person that's talking about it, holding it, buying it, telling their friends to buy it, is literally creating a bridge to the other side. And that bridge is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and wider and wider and wider. And more people are walking across the bridge. And as they're walking across the bridge, they're creating the new reality that we are going to live in. Yes, the people that walk across the bridge early and hold on to this will have more wealth in that new system. But that new system, the biggest part about that new system is that every single person, you could hate Bitcoin and you still benefit from it, because of the system change that is congruent to where we're going. And what I mean by that is, if prices fall their natural course, because they have to, because you have a hard cap on money, and that money can gain any velocity it needs to, because you have a 10-minute window that it can, because it's technology instead of gold, right? And so you can gain any velocity you want. Then what that means is prices fall forever. And so even if you hate Bitcoin, you are sharing in the abundance of prices falling forever because of Bitcoin. And that's what and so you could scream at it all you want. It keeps it in the news more and everything else. The biggest thing I think we need to think about is how to talk from a position of hope instead of fear, because people are living in a perpetual fear, to get people to the other side, or at least investigate Bitcoin for what it is rather than what they think it is.
Wow, yeah. Do you see, okay, I want to transition to this really important topic, okay, when we talk about free private cities and or countries like El Salvador, do you see an economy evolving, especially now with these volcano bonds, and I mean, I guess they're using all these volcano bonds, or this kind of financing to build infrastructures, be it Bitcoin City, or or anywhere. It doesn't have necessarily to be in El Salvador, but do you see El Salvador is one of the first countries to really showcase this example of how the world could look like in a deflationary environment?
Absolutely. And why would they be first is the more important point. If the technology empowers people left out of a system, that's actually is the most critical thing you would think about in technology. Any technology evolution is it changes the rules so radically, and it changes the price and the rules so radically that the people most blocked out from the old system are advantaged by the new system, and they start building to the new system. So the first, I've said this multiple times, but the first suppliers on Amazon were not in Walmart stores. They were the ones that couldn't get into Walmart stores. And so what ends up happening is a new monopoly is built, because of the lower cost transaction costs. The entire internet itself was that happening, and it killed a whole bunch of monopolies as a result of making communication seamless and easy around the world. And and on top of that, we could do things like this. that we couldn't do before, and it gave us more value. That's what's happening that's what's happening in Bitcoin specifically. And so if you're a country that has been locked out of the financial system, and you have to price your labor in US dollars, and you have to compete against a power that can that has way more of an economy than you, and you have to price in US dollars, how could you ever grow your economy in that type of system? You're blocked out of the system. Worse, if you think about this, US essentially doesn't have to pay for energy, because their energy is priced in US dollars, or oil is priced in US dollars, and they can print more of it, and everybody else has to pay for it. So it gives an unfair advantage to certain countries over other countries. Now, that's kind of what I'm getting, is the monopoly countries have an advantage in the way the world was constructed. And there's a whole bunch of countries that have a disadvantage. So it's easy to see through that lens that if you reduce cost to a totally different degree, like the internet itself, then an entire industry can grow on top of that different cost. And that's what's happening in El Salvador, and it'll happen in many more countries. And then if you then talk about the experiments, or the El Salvador bond, or the private city, it doesn't matter if these experiments work or not. I suspect many of them will. But there were a lot of experiments on top of the internet that didn't work, that blew up. But the internet itself just got stronger and stronger and stronger, and people learned from those experiments to what to do next, how to make that better. So in that example, you need to look at Bitcoin as a primary layer. It's TCP/IP. It's the internet itself, and on top of that, Lightning and all of the different experiments that are going to happen to emerge are actually just making the entire protocol stronger and stronger and stronger, as more people race to create value for other people on top of that system.
I mean, I see El Salvador really has a huge potential. I mean, I'm really looking forward for other smaller countries like whatever Paraguay or other Latin American or even African nations, to go the same path or similar path like El Salvador, and attract, like, I think it has a huge potential to attract people like us, like who are in Austria, and being frightened because of this whole tyrannical measures, and I mean, the last pillar is the judicial system. We'll see if that works out. If that doesn't work out, then we're just a fig leaf, and we can forget the whole system.
But Kevin, just ask yourself that, and specifically tied to, if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, can just laws exist on corrupt money?
No. the whole system is so inherently corrupt,
Exactly. The whole system has to fail. The whole system has to change the laws to retain the power. Forget who's in the system. And again, that's why it's so important that people they're talking about people, and people are marching all over the place against those people, and you're creating this tension around the world, and that fear that you're talking about is that tension. And it will accelerate because people need somebody to blame. It's a system problem. It's a system problem that it cannot be solved. You can expect laws to change. You can expect the Fed to lose its independence and get overtaken by the government, because it has to, because people will vote for that to happen. People will give up their individual rights and freedoms to control the system, and they'll do it in a faster and faster rate, thinking it's just a little bit this time, and this will fix it, and this will fix it, and they'll make the entire system. And so step out. That's why, if you understand what Bitcoin is, and it's a new system, it's a totally new system, and you can't change the system from the system, then it's a totally different message than leaning into that fear.
I'm just thinking, Jeff, I mean, if I was the state or the government, I mean, you're scaring off people. People would just, take their wealth or, sell their assets, sell their real estate, put it into Bitcoin and just migrate to somewhere else. I mean, this is something that somehow, I don't know, I just don't understand that they're literally like scaring off people. They're like people who would otherwise be investing money or entrepreneurs or building businesses. Why are doing this? I mean, this is suicidal.
Yeah, and in a smaller example, every country that goes through this does the same thing. As the best people leave that country and they immigrate to a different country that is individual rights and freedoms, or they try to get into a different country that's has individual rights and freedoms in a market-based economy. The problem today is every single country doesn't have that. It's just and it's getting worse. So what you asked before is where, well, except for El Salvador, but where do I go that has that? And you're going to see more and more countries, just because of game theory, competing for people, competing for labor capital and the best capital, and that capital is Bitcoin. People are going to be competing for it, and they're going to make laws that are that protect people's rights based on Bitcoin, so they can keep them. Because you could get on a plane anywhere. That didn't exist. That mobility didn't exist before Bitcoin, or it didn't exist like it does in Bitcoin, where if you remember 12 words, you can go anywhere and nobody can stop you. And it used to, people thought they were safe and they had all of their wealth in a country. And what they did is they were getting richer and richer, buying more and more assets in that country, like housing, and they were embedding themselves, and they were creating more and more risk for themselves as the inevitable happened in that country. If you look at Lebanon today, I don't know if the value of your real estate helps you if you can't get out of what's happening today in Lebanon. Same thing that's starting to happen in Turkey, Venezuela, and the likes. So that's coming all around the world. And through that lens, people are what they think is safe is not safe at all. The tail risk is different than they think. Bitcoin in that is not just an asymmetric bet to the upside. I believe it's actually the safest asset on the planet today.
Yeah, it's something that, I think people are slowly waking up to this fact, but I guess the pain point hasn't been reached. I don't know.
But the point is, the pain point has been reached for a lot of people, but it's locked them into their existing narrative, which is blaming somebody else. So that pain point, I think that's actually the point more specifically. When Bitcoiners, when we don't look at that pain and don't understand what people are doing as a result of that, it's harder for them to see it. They'll lock into their narrative. They'll believe, look, what you started with. Effectively, what you'll believe is conspiracy theories everywhere. Let's burn down government. Right. That's what a whole bunch of people will believe, and they will be pitted against society, making it worse and worse and worse.
Right. Jeff, you mentioned, I think, energy, and before I forget that question from my cousin, he's a Bitcoiner. He said, let me just read you that question. I believe Jeff is a proponent of pricing energy in Bitcoin, but I'm curious to know his opinion about the transition path of the energy market. The green energy market is heavily subsidized at the moment, and there's no sign of slowing down, especially in Europe, which has led to the point that manufacturers cannot even fulfill the order intakes. which is one of the main factors of highest energy prices in some European countries like Germany and Denmark. At the same time, the competitors in the market have to compete to lower their cost of energy to be able to survive. How do you see the transition of pricing energy in a different unit will be playing out with the existence of the current system, which is manipulating the market principles by their cheap subsidies?
So it's almost the same thing I said about the cubic farmers example, and in this case, what your cousin's asking is, in that example, they're also printing money to lower the cost of some certain items so that they can drive the industry to renewables. I think in that example, because we're so early in the beginning of it, but if you think about how the U.S. priced oil and energy, right? So or price oil, which is energy in U.S. dollars, and became the standard of the world. So the U.S. dollar would have broken down in 1971 had that not been the case. But essentially, you offer protection to Saudi Arabia in trade for pricing oil. And then you make sure you do that everywhere, and all oil is priced in US dollars. And to do that, essentially, effectively, you get free energy, everybody else pays for energy. And you use that to be able to build your war machine, to be able to make sure you have lane access and nobody gets off that, because people need to price. If other people start pricing in other currencies, that breaks down. And that works for a long time, and it builds this. And then China grows into a superpower, largely because of a trade imbalance, cheap labor on one side, consumers on manufacturing on one side, consumers on the other side. One input is cheap labor. One input is pay people a bunch of money so they can buy. You can't keep paying people a bunch of money because that loan keeps growing and growing and growing. But China's buying your bonds. China's keeping your rates low because they're buying your bonds. And then one day China wakes up, 2016 is that day, and they say, just a second, there's no way the US can pay us back in real terms. Impossible. So they can't pay us back in real terms. So they stop buying the bonds. And China instead goes and buys assets around the world, like rare earth mines and everything else. And it starts the tension of this system. And then that accelerates. Now the US has to buy their own bonds. Mm-hmm. and they have to monetize that debt, and it gets worse and worse. So you have to ask yourself through that lens, the oil producers saying, wait, am I going to get paid for oil in dollars that are worth 20% less next year, or 30% less next year, or 50? And at some point, that whole thing is going to break. Well, that's happening. Well, that whole thing's happening. At a different lens, energy is moving everywhere. Your volcano bonds is a good example. It's just energy. In BC, I realized that we have so much hydropower that they turned off a whole bunch of dams. So the BC Hydro, the central utility, will not take the power in because it's so low cost that they need to make money. So, and that's creating a whole bunch of market imbalances so they can make more money and pay for infrastructure on other things. So energy already, if you looked at the actual energy, what it would be in a free market, is already reducing in price. And what's happening with these alternative sources of energy, which are everywhere, stranded energy, they're starting to price in Bitcoin. And those Bitcoin miners are holding energy or Bitcoin on their balance sheet because they know that. And they know it's going to be valued more over time. Otherwise, they would be selling that into market to fund their operations. And that transition will speed up. And it's really early. Most of the energy of the world today is still oil. A bunch of it is still coal. So it's really early, but it'll accelerate through this. And some energy. So if you're saying subsidize energy and something that doesn't have an economic benefit, it'll be way later until it does, or people will invest a bunch of money into it that is productive capital, because they believe that it'll have a better return. But on a free market, and what Bitcoin's doing, it's going to move there anyways, and it's just a matter of time.
Especially when an unreliable, what do you call it, like unsustainable energy forms, like whatever would it be at the moment, solar, wind, which is unreliable, is being heavily subsidized. And now I think a few countries are now pushing, or they're recognizing the opportunity to go into more. I mean, I'm a total proponent of nuclear energy if it's done right, and with the standard, the best sort of standard of technology. I think some countries are pushing, which I have read about. They're pushing, the nuclear technologies. Would you agree? I mean, is that the way to go?
Yeah. It's a good clean energy, and it's a great energy. Now, the capital cost to do it and the time to do it, I think, is a big deal. All the while, by the way, I'm close to some of these other industries, and in solar specifically. There's whether it's this innovation or other innovations, but there's an innovation right now that I'm really close to the company that increases the power transfer, the power transmitted from 20% to 50%. So you're going to have some major changes with advancing technology that render some of the assumptions that people are making today useless. That's what but I mean, the market's going to decide this, and the market is deciding it on Bitcoin. One, solar and other energy is actually a good thing for a utility, because Bitcoin can take up the slack as that transition happens.
Oh, great. So Jeff, I want to respect the time. Just to wrap up, let me just ask you, this topic which really fascinates me, because we talked, with with Greg Foss about Jason Laurie, who's in the Space Force and writing about this.
I'm close to Jason.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have a lot of hope that he could somehow initiate or promote this idea within the military-industrial complex to finally comprehend, Bitcoin as the best, most efficient defense technology. Could that consequentially, could that eventually, hopefully, unleash the technologies which have been developed and used and in a more or less, let's say, compartmentalized way within the military industrial complex for civilian use? You know what I'm getting at? Like, is that the path to go? Like, finally, to make, because if we want to have like a human civilization, we need other infrastructures, technological infrastructures.
I think your question just clarify me. There's a whole bunch of technology that government sees before we see it, and will that open that up? And so today we live in a competition-based world, and that competition, almost a zero-sum game. Now, if you have manipulated money, you do have a zero-sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses, because of the manipulated money. In a free market, the winners drive pricing down, so everybody wins. So what ends up happening is we evolve through. You wouldn't 200 years ago, 300 years ago, a lot of the stuff we take for granted for today, our lifespan included, we didn't have, and that's a result of every single thing in our world is really an idea first, and those ideas compete for value, and that competition, and where labor and capital move to drive that competition, essentially to bet on the future value of that, right? So So in an entrepreneurial endeavor is making a bet against all other bets that this future, that I can create a bunch of value by doing it this way. And the only way you win is if other people believe, if other people choose your service or product, and that makes that bet or win, and that advances humanity. It doesn't advance humanity if you lose and you still win, or you win and you win at an order of magnitude that's 10 times what you should, because pricing doesn't fall, because pricing stays up, and you magnify a win and everybody else is losing. So under sound money principles, those bets are the path to be able to advance technology. Now, I think what you're asking is, and sorry if I've done a bad job of this, is under unsound principles, then all of those bets need to be put into government, into military complex, to be able to drive competition between around the globe to win at somebody else's loss. And you have to, because if somebody else, like if you think about what's happening in China today, hypersonic weapons, or if you think about nuclear weapons and everything else, what ends up happening is you get to that Schelling point of competition where somebody doesn't invade you because they're worried about you pressing a button, and now they need nuclear weapons themselves, or they need the next iteration. They need space weapons to be able to countervail some other weapon. And so a lot of that in military complex, it moves into there, and on that competition, all based on we have to win at somebody else's loss. Bitcoin changes that, and it changes it in such a powerful way that competition, global competition, it now enforces Bitcoin and the rules, and all of those ideas get put into the free market, and so that competition drives abundance is really what happens. Some of those, yeah, they would come out in that environment.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. So Jeff, just to close up, wrap up, what do you think is the trajectory? I mean, I'm pretty convinced in the next 10 years we will see sort of a hyperbolic, on every level. Call it evolution, technological innovation, sort of a hyper Bitcoinization. If we zoom out a little bit, what's your perspective? What's your prediction?
Besides the immediate concern I have of it's not ready, it's not integrated into society enough, not enough people have it, and what that means for people who don't have it is chilling. And what that means for governments that don't have it, for businesses that don't, people that don't have it, is chilling, because they're going to be further manipulated, and they won't know what's happening. And so apart from that, and that's going to happen at some point through. It's happening now. If you talk about psyops, and it's happening now, and it's bound to happen a bunch worse. My hope is more people understand this, and that you can have a gradual transition to the other side. But if you just kind of what you're talking about, if you measure everything in Bitcoin, prices will come down forever.
Yeah, exactly. Measuring it in the unit of account of Bitcoin. This is something which we've been thinking about, is that why don't we just what if we just take the absolute scarcity of Bitcoin and always measure it against the absolute scarcity? But I think it's not mature yet, right? The time has not come because then we wouldn't be denominating constantly, in price, like dollar, euro, whatever one Bitcoin equals. But then we would just be thinking in purchasing power. The time will come, I guess.
Yeah, and that's what so many people are doing right now, and that's why they sell their Bitcoin.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And they need to think about the kind of what we're saying. In any event, I suspect pricing everything else will come down forever against Bitcoin. And And if you understand what that means, then you're going to accumulate it. You won't worry about pricing movements and pricing. You'll use it as a time to accumulate over time.
All right, Jeff, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts, or again, people should read your book. It's fascinating. It's essential, I think, for comprehending really the bigger picture. Yeah.
I would just say, if one final thought is,
Yeah.
nothing has changed from that narrative, from what I wrote in the book.
Right.
If anything, it's just accelerated on both sides, and it's that thesis laid out. We're living in these two systems that are colliding against each other, and they're going to grow further and further apart. That's what's happening. That's what's happening today. Some people, when I first wrote that, questioned the us versus them chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they question it anymore. Right, because you can see through that lens what humanity starts to do when you tearing people apart. But if I finish on one thing, you're part of, you, Kevin, me, we are all part of the same system, and if it's easy to think it's everybody else, and not us. So we just need to keep that in check.
Exactly. Yeah. This is why it's so more important than ever, to start with oneself and and just adapt to the new conditions, right? To the evolving conditions. Yeah. So Jeff, thank you so much again for your time and for all your work, and hope we're gonna hopefully we can repeat this or eventually see one another in the very near future.
Are you coming to Bitcoin 22?
I'm gonna try, but I don't have a ticket yet because we don't know where we're gonna be. Are we gonna be in Austria? Or do we have to move? So I mean, we're already really seriously thinking about packing our stuff, just winning some time until we can have a make a solid decision where to go and where to establish ourselves, because my girlfriend also has has a business. We have a baby. She's going to be 1 year old next month, and so it's still easy, I guess. As long as the children are so young, it's, I guess, easier than if the kid was 6 or 7 years old, our daughter. So we'll see how this whole thing evolves.
Got it.
Okay, Jeff. Thank you so much again. I'll see you soon. Okay.
You bet. Thanks.
Bye. Take care. All right. Buy the book by Jeff Booth, The Price of Tomorrow, Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. Follow him on Twitter. I've learned so much with Jeff and in all these conversations, and there's tons of materials, other interviews, podcasts, and presentations, or the one he did, I think, recently in Vienna. And yeah, make sure you follow him and share this video, share this interview to as many friends and families and followers you have. And if you have any questions, suggestions, let me know. My name is Kay Vandavani, the host of the Kay Vandavani Connection Show, and I'll see you soon. Buy Bitcoin and spread the word. All right, ready for